Hello everyone, this is rather a unique video for my channel where I get to talk about Sonic in a character study type way, but more specifically, this video will talk and more so defend how he's portrayed in IDW. I have seen a lot of talk and discourse about how he's written in IDW, along with accusations of inconsistencies with how he's written in the games, and I just want to give my 2 cents on the matter because some arguments I do agree with and some I don't. Also, I feel like some elements of his characterization and storytelling are not being focused on enough when people had this discussion. I am not aiming to silence anyone who has legitimate critical feedback on IDW or some that would disagree with me or what I say about the subject. This is just me throwing my hat into this ring and doing my own critical analysis of IDW Sonic. So without further ado, let's start. First off, we got to understand the character of Sonic from the games. This is actually really difficult because there's a lot of things to say about this character other than the surface level understanding that he's a cool blue dude with an attitude. However, what makes Sonic so appealing to me and so many people across the world is that he's a very simple guy. The quote that defines him best is this scene from Sonic Adventure 2.
What you see is what you get. Just a guy that loves adventure. I'm Sonic the Hedgehog.
If you need another example of what embodies his character, just listen to the lyrics of It Doesn't Matter. Sonic isn't no superhero, he's not the chosen one, he's not a destined hero. The whole point of Sonic's character is that he's just a guy who does what he believes is right. It's something that is very inspiring and that's what people like about him. It's actually important to know that Sonic stands up against oppression and fights for freedom, which has always been part of his obsession. Also, another thing is his sheer willpower. This guy will stand up no matter how hard he gets beaten and will never, like his theme song would say, give up the fight and have that iconic smile on his face. And examples like how he got beaten up in Black Knight, or how he continues to march on in Frontiers despite the cyber corruption getting to him. People still talk about these moments to this day, so you know it left an impact on people. It's evident of the fact that Sonic, ironically, isn't usually the focus of the storylines in his games. It's a pretty cool way to look at the stories in some of these games because while Sonic is the main character, it's usually not his story. We see his perspective, yes, but usually Sonic stories in the games is a surface level understanding of the story. Example being that Sonic Adventure 1 is technically Knuckles' story since that ties to his heritage with his Echidna tribe. His story chronologically starts first. He was the first and last to encounter chaos before last story, which is thematically appropriate since it's the current Guardian going against the previous Guardian, the Master of Emerald. And he ends his story not wanting to know why he's guarding the Emerald, the opposite of how he wanted why he guards it at the beginning of his story. Sonic is just the guy who saves the day at the end when fighting against perfect chaos. Same thing can be said for Sonic Adventure 2 because that was Shadow's story, where his arc starts off with him being arrogant, a lone wolf, and has hatred for humanity as he wants to destroy the planet. Throughout the story, Shadow gets conflicted with his actions and identity, which results in him changing for the better as he then becomes the hero of the story and sacrifices his life. I bring this up because my final analysis point of Sonic is that due to Sonic's actions and who he is, he still plays a part in changing the course of these stories and making some characters change for the better. A great example is Tails, who was a bullied child that became dependent on Sonic, but the more time he spends his time with his hero as the years go by, he becomes more independent and standing on his own, especially against lesser villains like Winnie Wishcard and Battle Cuckoo, with his character arc meeting its ultimate test where he faced Eggman alone in Saving Station Square. Well, momentarily. That's just the appeal of Sonic. He's so inspirational that in all the stories that feature him, he's the one that influences the environment and people around him to be better. The story doesn't necessarily change him, he's the one that changes the story. Okay, that explains the character of Sonic in the games and the impact he has made on his friends, former enemies, and the world around him. So let's talk about how he is in IDW. So what we know about Game Sonic is that he's a character that does what he believes is the right thing to do, and his undefeatable spirit to keep going even if things get tough. So does IDW Sonic follow that criteria, or is it at least consistent with how he's portrayed in the games? Well, yes, actually. IDW Sonic follows the exact same criteria as he does in the games, regardless of canonicity or not. The only thing that could be improved is from a dialogue perspective, where Sonic can talk a bit too much in some panels. Sometimes it feels like Sonic practices these speeches in the shower, rather than saying what's on his mind. This panel in issue 50, for example. I feel like this scene would have been better if Sonic didn't talk at all, because it would have a bigger impact emotionally if he was quiet. Let the scene have its quiet moment, as this face from Sonic when he mourns Surge is all you need for an emotional moment. Honestly, that's the only issue with how he's portrayed in IDW is the occasional speech he gives out, and even then, he's not saying anything inherently out of character. Plus, Sonic is no stranger to having long speeches since the 90s. So yeah, that's the only problem to me, and even then, it's simply it's not what you say, it's how you say it situation. So is that it? the video's over? No, there are some arguments that I just don't necessarily agree with, and I want to address them, one by one. One argument I've seen a lot is that Sonic is too merciful for essentially giving his enemies a chance to find their independence in the world, which some would say not only makes him inconsistent with the games, but also makes him much more recklessly careless. Well, for one thing, Sonic has had success changing people for the better like Chaos, Shadow, Melina, etc., and IDW is just continuing that trend. I feel like that most importantly, people forget why he does it in the context of the story / status quo at the time. The biggest accusations that Sonic is too forgiving are with villains Metal Sonic, Eggman, and Surge. Let's start with the context of the series, which take place after Forces and the world is rebuilding itself after the war. So after reintroduction to our favorite characters and introducing new fan favorites, we essentially got a sequel to Sonic Heroes with Neo Metal Sonic returning as the main villain of the arc. After the fight, Sonic tries to convince Metal Sonic to find his purpose in life. People argue that Sonic is trying to make Metal Sonic turn good, but that's not the point of what he's saying. Metal Sonic was programmed to serve Eggman, and that's his only purpose in life. Eggman at this point was gone, and not missing by the way. Like, who he was is gone and replaced by a whole new persona where he's essentially in retirement. Metal has no purpose at this point, and Sonic was saying to Metal to be his own person, and yeah, he did ask for a peaceful truce, but he wouldn't mind if Metal stayed evil as long as it was for his own purpose. Mind you, he didn't get frustrated when Metal Sonic stayed loyal to Eggman and was weaponized in issue 14. He just accepted Metal's choice and went back to the usual banter with him as always. Some may say that this moment in issue 26 where he got mad at Metal is the counter to that, but no. The Metal Virus arc put Sonic and his friends through the most difficult and tiring experience of their lives up to that point. And he was expressing his disappointment towards Metal Sonic here because it led to those circumstances. He wouldn't be saying this if the circumstances were less dire or something that is the usual Eggman's up to no good and putting animals and robots again plot. In issue 12, he essentially accepted whatever decision Metal Sonic decides because the status quo of the series has been shaken up. Sonic wouldn't let Metal Sonic go if the whereabouts of Eggman was still unknown. Heck, he probably would have asked Tails to find a way to reprogram Metal Sonic just like he did with Gamero for the safekeeping, at least to make him not subordinate to Eggman. It's even worth mentioning that Metal Sonic's brother, Mecha Sonic, outgrew his coding and found his own purpose. Let's go to Eggman, and I feel like the arguments take these scenes out of context, or better yet, misunderstanding them. When the series started, Eggman had amnesia and became Mr. Tinker. He was tested for several weeks, presumably a month by the town villagers, but it's proven that Eggman has forgotten everything and the Mr. Tinker persona took over. Sonic and the Chaos were skeptical at first because Eggman is known to be a massive gaslighter and manipulator in the past, but yeah, Eggman's no more and Mr. Tinker is here to stay. It puts the series in a new light because it asks the question, could Eggman be good? It's a question that Sonic and Co were asking themselves, and they were content with the possibility that Eggman can be good. Sadly, that didn't happen because Fanboy over here pretty much helped resurrect Eggman along with Metal. It's tragic, honestly. When Eggman has returned and Sonic caught up with him, Sonic does ask why he wasn't content with being Mr. Tinker, yes, but Eggman says, being villain is better. Sonic accepts that without hesitation and attacks Eggman just like the old times, even attempting to infect him. Once the Metavirus arc was done and Sonic returned from Blaze's dimension, he said this to Eggman.
Until next time, Doc. And the time after that, and the one after that, maybe you'll eventually come around.
Some people think it's out of character for Sonic to believe that Eggman can change because there are times when he says the opposite. But again, context. In those times, Sonic is specifically talking about Eggman and Eggman only. In IDW, it's the first time that belief was questioned. Eggman could change since he was so content as Mr. Tinker. There's actually a great fan comic by Skull S Cake that shows an alternate reality where Mr. Tinker stays as Mr. Tinker, even after all the brainwashing Starline does. This is the hypothetical that Sonic believed was going to happen from the point he realized Eggman could be gone forever. That's the point. Nearly the first 30 plus issues of IDW pretty much ask, could Eggman be good? And his answer is yes, but he won't commit to it because he's Eggman. This panel is just Sonic being slightly introspective and expressing his disappointment on that what if, before moving on from that feeling like he always does. Another thing to note is that the status quo of the franchise itself, the classic Sonic vs. Eggman shenanigans, is resurrected after issue 32. Between the end of Forces and this issue, the status quo was in a whole different state as if the series could have taken a whole new direction, like with Starline replacing Eggman as the villain of the series. Once issue 33 begins, the status quo is back to normal, and anytime Sonic meets up with Eggman, It's the usual stuff to expect from these two. Sonic's not begging Eggman to go back to Mr. Tinker, is now back to normalcy as always, and Sonic doesn't mind that. Now, let's talk about the new kid on the block, Surge. Now, to put her backstory in a nutshell, she's pretty much Shadow from SA2, but the main key difference is that while Shadow was artificially made, Surge was brainwashed, and her previous life was taken away from her just to be Starline's Metal Sonic. Fast forward where she first fought Sonic, and during the break, Sonic tries to reason with her that they could restart just to know her story and gives the speech. Sonic's giving Surge a window to redeem and think for herself because he doesn't know her story. And due to his character growth over the years, he has seen that there are better ways to solve this conflict without fighting. When Surge says no and says that she wants to burn the world to the ground, Sonic pretty much starts low-diffing her and says that he will defeat her if she goes that route. All Sonic wants is context about Surge, and when he does find out, he, like his usual self, tries to reason with her and convince her that she can be her own person since Starline is dead. Sonic's not really trying to make everyone be good, but rather find their own purpose in life and not be oppressed by what's expected of them, like his bio says about him. He only did that with Eggman because he saw that Eggman could be good if he wanted to. Once the status quo of their dynamic restarts, he doesn't wish for Eggman to change. Same thing goes to Metal Sonic. He won't hold back his punches if they decide to go evil. Even with Surge in recent issues pointing out this facade that she changed, he's skeptical and even implies that he will beat her down like a drum if she attempts to harm people. He's not saying everyone should be good, he's saying that people should be aware of their own freedom, which is one of the main principles since his inception in the 90s. One other small argument I have seen from people is that they will say that Sonic had no mercy for previous villains in the series, such as the Black Arms or King Arthur, so it's inconsistent for him to be doing the opposite here in IDW. While that is true to an extent, those guys don't deserve any sympathy from him because they make it perfectly clear who they are as a person and their motives are downright diabolical. Of course, Sonic would have no problem encouraging Shadow to kill an alien warlord. Of course, Sonic has no problem damning a multiversal power-hungry genie. Of course, he would have no problem killing the embodiment of death itself, who lives to destroy just because it can. At least here in IDW, the three villains he has shown mercy for can be argued to be much more morally conflicted. Okay, moving on. Earlier, I said that Sonic has had character growth over the years. Some people might want to know why I said that, so this is a good segue to the next argument I disagree with. Recently, IDW launched this new miniseries centered around Fang, which takes place in the Classic era, and Classic Sonic makes an appearance in the series. People have made this argument that Classic Sonic's characterization is one-to-one to what Sonic should be, and Modern Sonic in IDW isn't, which led to some argument in defense of IDW/Modern Sonic, saying that he's much more mature than Classic Sonic, and counter arguments saying that he's a static character. He's not supposed to evolve or develop. Okay, so for people who don't know what that is, a static character is usually a character that sees little to no development in the story. Some examples of a static character are Forrest Gump or Furious Bueller. These are characters that are relatively the same character from the beginning of the story as they are at the end of the story. Sonic is an example of that. The Sonic we see in Sonic 1 is really the same character we have now. The opposite to a static character is a dynamic character who goes through a huge change throughout the story. Shadow in SA2 is a good example. However, a static character can learn or develop in a story as long as it's not going against who they are. If anything, whatever a static character learns in a story is not a fundamental change to who they are or what they believe in. It's usually a change that's more supplementary to who they already are to begin with. It's a misconception that static characters can't necessarily develop at all. Look at Goku from Dragon Ball, for example, because he's also a static character. At his core, he's just a naive monkey kid who wants to better himself as a martial artist and protect those he loves, which never changes from the beginning of the series to where we are now. However, he does learn to never overestimate himself, becoming more heroic, accepting his same heritage, learning to control any emotional reaction to achieve ultra instinct, etc. But all these lessons and arts don't fundamentally change his character or who he is. The character growth he goes through just builds upon the existing fundamentals. Well, he did hit his head, which essentially rebooted his character, but we're not here to talk about that. So, going back to Sonic, has he ever learned or developed throughout the series? Yes, actually. Sonic Adventure 2 is apparent that he went through an arc, and that results from Shadow. In the beginning, Sonic's ego was put on the line due to Shadow being a doppelganger that got the upper hand on him. Throughout the story, Sonic was hell-bent on beating the crap out of this faker. Fast forward to the scene when Eggman launched Sonic out to space to die. Sonic should have died here, but he used his signature move of that faker to get himself out of there. This is the turning point of Sonic's arc. He's only alive due to Shadow, which is why this scene He's being respectful towards Shadow and thanks him for indirectly saving him. Sonic doesn't see him as a faker anymore at this point. He sees him as a worthy rival. After Shadow's sacrifice to save the world, Sonic is the one that is the most reflective and melancholy about Shadow and his origins. In this game, Sonic's arc went from hating someone because of his fractured ego to putting his ego aside and respecting that person. The other example is Sonic Unleashed. I think people forget that Sonic was at his most insecure in this game because of the Werewolf form. He starts off being put off by it and believes it's a curse. He doesn't feel like himself in this form and puts a damper on his mood, especially this scene with Amy not recognizing him, which to him, the person that is in love with him not recognizing him because he now this beast is crushing. It wasn't until when Chip got his memories back where at first, Sonic thought that he stayed who he is spiritually because of Chip's influence, but no. Chip enlightens him that his spirit is so unbreakable that nothing, not even transforming to a werewolf, would change that. Sonic's arc in Unleashed is about him learning that no matter what happens to him physically, like in looks with the Werehog, it will never change who he is on the inside. Those are two prime examples of where Sonic goes through an arc, but who he is as a character, his personality or beliefs are still left intact. Heck, his arc in Unleashed is literally him learning that fact about himself. So yeah, Sonic has shown growth over the years and people probably didn't notice it. There's actually some subtleties that people didn't pick up as well. Due to his arc in Unleashed, if he ever got a sequel where Sonic transforms back into the Werehog, he will automatically be much more accepting of the form and probably excited to use it again. After Shadow, have you ever noticed that Sonic became less antagonistic towards new rivals? Like with Blaze, he was chasing her throughout the first half of Rush's story because she gave off a suspicious vibe and to know if she has any relation with the space-time continuum tearing apart. Once he caught up to her, instead of picking a fight with her, he just asked her questions if she has anything to do with the space-time continuum being ripped apart and instantly catches on that she's introverted, which leads to him trying to help and team up with her. Near the end of the story, Blaze is the one that instigated the fight between her and Sonic, where the latter was trying to calm her down and just wanted her to accept his help. Silver is another good example because he was always initiating the fight between him and Sonic. Sonic only wanted to talk it out with Silver and know what his deal is, but only fought back to defend himself and Elise. Even then, after the fight, Sonic still tries to reason with him instead of glowing like he did with Shadow.
Do you know who I am?
As the series went on after SA2, Sonic has acquired the foresight to know that the rivals he meets might have a bigger story behind their motives and rather just talk it out with them, which has been proven successful for them to get on the right path. That's the whole point in his speech to Surge in issue 50. It's reflective of that growth and knowledge he gained due to his experience with others in the past when he used to be the one instigating fights. Now, let's get back to Classic Sonic because I sidetracked a bit. Some believe that Classic Sonic in IDW is more Sonic, while IDW Modern Sonic isn't, but no. They're the same character, just in different time periods where Classic Sonic hasn't gone through all the growth that Modern/IDW Sonic will go through. You're looking at Sonic in his purest form, the basic framework of the character. The world, the cast, and the villains at this point in his life were much more simplistic than Modern's. Like, could you imagine Modern Sonic saying this to Tails? Probably not, because their brotherly bond grew over the years, especially after Tails gained his own independence and built confidence within himself. Not to say he hated Tails, no, but their friendship was in their early days. Amy always was chasing Sonic around when he did not want to be bothered by her, but the more time they spent together, that dynamic fades out where Amy doesn't need to chase him anymore, and Sonic doesn't want to run away from her. They see each other as equals now. Their personalities never change as Amy still has a huge crush on Sonic, it's just there's no need for the cat and mouse chase anymore. Look at the villains. In Classic Sonic's world, there was no such thing as a gray area with the villains. All the villains at this point wouldn't be out of place in a Saturday morning cartoon back in the day. At worst, you get a scientist who puts animals in robots and uses magical gems to become a tyrant. There is no point for essentially a younger Sonic to give any form of sympathy to these guys. Knuckles is the only exception as he was the rival at the time, and even then, Sonic didn't do anything to change Knuckles' mind in Sonic 3. Their whole dynamic was essentially, oh yeah, time for a new adventure, Super Sonic style. We're just gonna go in here and destroy the Death Bag once and for... No, run that back. What the heck? Oh, I found you now, Dreadlocks. I'm about to punch them in. Oh my god! Have a nice fall, you stupid bitch. What's the point of this? Stop! Knuck if you buck, Dreadlock. Shoot, stop! Dang it! Ah, no! Oh, what the heck is going on now? Oh, Oh. Wait, so we're friends now?
Oh, we gotta get to the death egg. Hey man, we're gonna get your rock back. We'll be right back. Let's go, Tails.
The turning point of that attitude towards villains changes in Adventure 1 with Gamma and Chaos. Sonic wanted to destroy Gamma simply due to the fact that he's a robot, but Amy convinced him not to because Gamma is actually a good person. To Sonic, it's the first time he's ever been introduced to the concept that a robot can be good, knowing his prior history of robots stating otherwise. This changed his viewpoint of robots as a whole because when he met Emerald in battle, he didn't assume he was evil and wanted to help him. Chaos is the first sympathetic villain in the entire franchise, but Sonic treated him as a monster from the start because on surface level, that is what he was accustomed to at this point. Once he realized that Chaos is actually an enraged creature that just wants revenge on the world because he's sad and not destroyed because he can, he vowed to calm Chaos and put him at ease instead of putting him in damnation. In Classic Times period, the inverse of that happens. Evil Dragon needs to be still in that stone for eternity, especially after that terrible boss fight. You see my point though? Classic Sonic and the world around him is nowhere near as complex as modern. The stakes weren't high yet, as SA1 was the first time the whole world was at stake, rather than just an island in the classic games. Other characters haven't gone through their arcs yet, and Sonic has met quote-unquote bad guys who had troubling backstories and are morally conflicted. It's usually, rebut this bag, go beat him. Life was simple back then. So yeah, Sonic is a static character, but that does not mean he never had any sort of growth over the years, and IDW is representative of that. I think the problem is that the word mature was used to defend IDW Sonic when really the better word is experience, due to Sonic's experience in his lifetime. That's what IDW Sonic is. He's a veteran, seasoned Sonic. With those arguments out of the way, it makes me wonder why people feel like IDW Sonic is drastically different from the games, even though I find that difficult to believe. Again, this is not me talking about any legitimate criticism, but the contempt some people have towards Sonic's portrayal on IDW and believing it's an inconsistent portrayal to the games. I have a few theories, and this is not meant to offend anyone, just hear me out. For one thing, we are still just coming out of an era where everyone in the Sonic cast characterizations were butchered, and when leaving that era into another one that is primarily focused on returning these characters to their former glory, everyone who cares will want to be positive that whatever new content with those characters stay true to that promise. It's why Shadow gets the most attention and constructive feedback these days. However, in doing so, I feel like it has led to some people obsessing over the very minute details that they don't like in the character portrayal and passing off as inaccurate to their ideal depiction of the character, while at the same time not understanding the context of not only the character's actions, but the story behind said actions as well. It's what I said about people using no instances with Sonic saying Eggman can't change and trying to discredit Sonic's actions in IDW. Yes, he can believe Eggman couldn't change, and he can be slightly disappointed that Eggman won't commit to a change that he was content with. Both can be true. I just think people take what a character says or does in a story at face value and try to prove that how a character is portrayed in one story has more validity over the other without acknowledging any sort of context. Not only it misrepresents what IDW is trying to accomplish in its storytelling, but ironically misrepresents the story to the games as a result and not seeing the nuances. Sonic is the same character as he is in Unleashed and Black Knight, but one story's theme is about friendship, which is why he's portrayed to be much more softer and subdued, because that's not just what the story needs for him, but also for that his bond between him and Chip is believable, especially with the scene showing that both did help each other in their friendship. Black Knight, on the other hand, has the theme of mortality or living life to the fullest, which is one of Sonic's core principles as a character. Despite the modern conventions of the story, it portrays Sonic as his usual upbeat, cool dude with an attitude persona because that's what the story needs him to do so that the message can be realized. Sonic is still the same character across both stories, but said stories focus on different sides of him because the goals of each story are dependent on that for their theming. It wouldn't be right to say that how Sonic is portrayed in Black Knight is an accurate portrayal of the character than how he is in Unleashed, because his two stories are structurally different from each other and demand different things from him. It would be misunderstanding the goals of the stories in the process. Same thing applies to IDW because even though there's continuity between arcs, it's a collection of stories with different themes. The major theme in the Metal Virus arc is survival. So you have a Sonic that is portrayed to be tired and angry because that will happen to a survivor of a zombie epidemic, but never losing his will of doing the right thing, which is reversing the epidemic. The major theme of the Imposter Syndrome arc, especially issue 50, is about veterans versus novices. So you have to focus on Sonic's experience side to counteract Surge's lack of experience for the story to work. These stories are handling the same character in different ways for the sake of their stories and themes. When it comes down to it, People just have to prefer portrayal of the same character. Some like how he was in the storybook games the most. Some would say they like how he was in Frontiers the most. IDW, the Adventure series, the list goes on. I think we let our preferences and how this character is presented get in the way of our judgment of a story when critiquing something, where we end up caring way too much about the characterization and forgetting about what the story itself is trying to do. That's how I feel about it, and why not just IDW, but modern characterizations debate happen on a frequent basis. I just feel like that if we were to open our minds a bit more and actually understand the goals of a story and how it uses Sonic, then I think discussing these stories and this character would be much more fun and enlightening, like a book club, I think. At least that's what I believe. I have said a lot about one single character in this video. I made this video because I just don't necessarily agree with some arguments against him and some arguments that I didn't discuss because I believe some of them are overblown. Again, don't take this as me trying to silence any legitimate critical feedback on the writing IDW, because at the end of the day, we all want a better product than the last. This is just me giving my 2 cents on one of my favorite characters of all time and how he's portrayed. Maybe I convinced you to look at how he's portrayed differently before, or you probably disagree with what I said here, which is fine. Well, that's it for the video, and thank you so much for watching me ramble for over a long time. I will see you next time.